Hey, welcome to the Cheap Air Gunner channel. It's Cherokee Steve. I haven't done a video in a while and I was thinking of a good topic. And I chose one that might actually be an important one for some of you out there that routinely watch the channel. But basically what I decided on doing was full-length rifles such as my Hatsan Carnivore versus Bullpups, which I have two of. The Hatsan Hercules Bully in 45 caliber and the Hatsan Flash Pup in 25 caliber. There are advantages and disadvantages to each versus the other. And I thought I would get into it and talk about some of the things you might or might not realize about one or the other. So let's get into it. The first one I want to touch on is the Hatsan Carnivore that I have in 357. It's a full-length rifle, and believe me, it is a long rifle. As you can tell, standing from the distance I am from the camera, I can't even fit this whole thing in the camera view. Overall length of this from the tip of the barrel to the end of the butt pad is 49 inches. That is 4 feet 1 inches long. Now, one of the things I do like about this particular gun is that the weight of it is extremely well centered. It's very balanced. It's not front heavy, it's not back heavy. It's literally over right where you would rest your front hand. I like it. It has the synthetic stock. It is an extremely heavy gun, and I will post up a more specific weight on this particular gun. There is a reason why it comes with the sling attachments on the gun and a sling. That is definitely something you are going to need if you're trekking into a spot where you're eventually going to be doing a stand. This isn't something you would want to be carrying by hand for any particularly long length of time. It is very decently weighted. That's a nice way of saying it's heavy. Now, it does balance out as well on a sling as well as in the hand. The centered, specific center of weight on this particular gun really plays out to a nice feel carrying it on a sling or shouldering. But it is definitely very heavy. It is definitely very long. Being a 357, this would be something I would want to use for medium type game. Possibly something as small as a coyote, more along the lines of a wild pig is what I would want to hunt with this particular rifle. In Michigan, I could hunt deer with this particular rifle, although I would question the ability to do that just based on the power of the gun and the ethically sound method I would be able to take a deer with this. If it was, I would certainly keep it on a small deer. But the action, the bolt action, is right above the trigger. That's also very nice. The safety is right back here on this side, very close to where my thumb would be anyway. And it does auto engage with the cocking of the gun, which is what Hatsan did for a long time on all of their guns. They have recently gotten away from that and have included manual safeties. But as far as specifically talking about this as a full-length gun, it does, one of the benefits of it, it has an extremely long air cylinder capable of holding a good deal of air without interfering with the barrel. They took that into account and used it to the length's advantage. Nice large air cylinder that is removable as well. Detractors, weight and length. Positives about this particular gun: very well centered weight. Useful for shouldering and for carrying on a sling. It certainly is not uncomfortable. The fact that the weight is not off balanced more towards the front of the gun or the back of the gun makes it somewhat easy to carry with a sling. Those are the positives. And the ability to use an increased capacity of air based on the length of the air cylinder. Those are some advantages and disadvantages you get with this particular gun. Now for this portion of the video, let's get into the Bullpups. Now one of the misconceptions, what has turned out to be a misconception, I consider it to be a misconception with the Bullpup, is you just simply look at the length of the gun, and obviously it's much shorter than a full-length rifle. Much shorter. Both of these. The Flash Pup is shorter than the Hatsan Hercules Bully, but the Hatsan Hercules Bully is much shorter than the Hatsan Carnivore, the full-length rifle I have out here. But the first thing that enters my mind when I think of bullpup versus full-length rifle, and the fact that it obviously is more compact, I translate that into weight savings, and that isn't necessarily the case. Not, at least not to the degree I would conceptualize in my head. Of course, the full-length, there is a full-length version for the Hatsan Hercules Bully, the Hatsan Hercules, the full-length version of the Bully, which happens to be an extremely heavy gun. I'm going to show the specifics for it, but I happen to know off the top of my head that the full-length Hercules is 13 pounds. It's a 13-pound gun. The Hatsan Hercules Bully, I believe, and I'll show the specifics on that, is 10.3 pounds. Now, the first thing that jumps to mind is, well, that is an extremely significant weight advantage from one versus the other. I would consider 10.3 pounds to still be a heavy gun, but compared to 13 pounds, that saves a lot of weight. Well, a lot of that comes specifically from the fact that the Hercules, the full-length version of the Hercules, has 2 air tanks. It has an extremely high air capacity. It utilizes one in the foregrip area and utilizes one behind the action in the buttstock area. The Hatsan Hercules Bully only has the 1 air tank in the foregrip area. So you immediately take into account weight savings from removing an air bomb from the gun. And that in and of itself, I would think, is responsible for almost all of that weight savings, from 13 down to 10.3. Now, if Hatsan had made a version of the full-length Hatsan Hercules with only one air tank, I don't think you would save a whole lot of weight. The weight savings wouldn't be significant. You would limit the advantage to the Bullpup simply to the length of it. It's a shorter gun. Again, versus a one-tank Hercules, it probably would not be that much lighter of a gun. But when you stop and you think about it, when I think about it, it makes sense. They're not really removing any mechanical features of the gun. The parts and the weight of those parts are going to be pretty close to the same. Actually, the Bullpup may come out slightly heavier as far as the mechanical aspects of the gun. You've basically taken a full-length rifle and moved everything back to make it shorter. But all of the mechanical aspects of the gun and the parts that go into it are the same between the full-length rifle and the Bullpup. As a matter of fact, the Bullpup, because of the linkage addition that has to be made to the trigger so that it can function with an action that has been moved farther back towards the buttstock, has added parts to the gun. That the linkage between the trigger and the sear doesn't exist on the full-length rifles as it does on a Bullpup. So you actually have more parts involved with the function of the Bullpup. And again, the weight savings I assumed because of shorter gun, lighter gun. That's kind of what I thought. Isn't necessarily the case. A better example of that is the flash pump versus the full-length version of it. Versus the full-length version of it, the Hatsan Flash. Again, I'll throw up some specifics, weight-wise, for one versus the other, but off the top of my head, again, I believe the Hatsan Flash is 6.6 pounds, something like that, and the Flash Pup is 6.1, 6.3, something, one of those. So it's about a half a pound or slightly under a half a pound weight savings with the Bullpup version. So there is weight savings. I believe that's responsible from less material that's used in the stock. If you look at the Flash Pup versus the Flash, there's just less material going on in the stock portion of the particular gun, so they did manage to come up with some weight savings between the two. Now, whether or not you consider that to be significant or not, a half a pound, or actually maybe slightly less than a half a pound, I can't remember off the top of my head, one weight versus the other, it is there. It's not something I would consider to be significant, but it is there. And what I'm comparing is the wood versions, the Hatsan Flash wood to the Hatsan Flash Pup wood. I happen to have the synthetic, but to keep the material the same and compare the weights, I thought that was more fair to do it that way. With the Flash Pup, the weight of the gun is not centered. It's back here, much more towards the rear end of the gun than the center of the gun or the front of the gun. It shoulders extremely easily. It stays extremely stable because you're not maintaining the center of the weight over your front. It's actually back closer to your shoulder. I'm right-handed as far as the way that I shoot, and I would say I do the vast majority of things right-handed. I am left-handed in some aspects, do things both ways, but most of the things I do are right-handed, and I believe my dominant arm is my right hand. So as far as shouldering and maintaining a steady hold on target for a longer length of time, this particular Bullpup setup really works to my advantage over a full-length rifle. Keeping everything steady and well-shouldered, I'm not even using my other hand, is fairly easily to do. With the majority of work being done by my right hand, my dominant hand and arm. But having it the majority of the center of the weight being back here does work extremely well for staying on target for longer periods of time. I believe that is definitely an advantage of the Bullpup over the full-length rifle. A little bit of weight savings, weight distribution, big advantage in my opinion to the Bullpup. Now, with the Flash Pup, the action, the cocking action is not over the trigger. The action is a significant distance from the trigger, in my opinion. Going to work this back and forth. So for this particular Bullpup, I consider that to be a disadvantage. Whereas with the Carnivore, the action is right over the trigger. Now this isn't the case with the Hatsan Hercules Bull. Now what does remain the same between the Flash Pup and the Hatsan Hercules Bully is the distribution of the weight. Most of it is back towards my shoulder and my dominant right arm. With this gun being as heavy as it is, being a Bullpup but still weighing 10.3 pounds, I get a much more steady hold in picture using a gun where the weight is more towards where I have it pressed into my shoulder. I really like that about the pup versions, the Bullpup versions of these guns versus the full-length rifle versions. This particular one does have the cocking action forward directly above the trigger, right here. Trigger's here, action's here. I can actually get my finger on the action without really moving any portion of I can't cock it, but that's how close it is to the trigger. I can definitely stay on target and cock this gun. That's the type of feature you're going to get with a Bullpup that is higher in price, as this certainly is much more expensive than the Flash Pup. But if you want to get into something from Hatsan anyway, in a bullpup, you're going to pretty much have to go with the bull as far as what Hatsan offers. But we're talking a 45 caliber versus a 25 caliber on a bullpup, which is directly above the trigger. But again, to do that, you're talking about more parts in longer linkage cords. For the cocking action, as well as the trigger being connected to the hammer and the sear, which has all been moved back. So that's going to negate some of, if you want that cocking action up right at the trigger, right above the trigger, you're going to sacrifice some weight that they didn't have to sacrifice with the flash pump. The biggest difference that I commonly hear from other people I know that are air gun owners or firearm owners, traditional firearm owners, is purely the aesthetics of the gun and how it looks. I know people that absolutely can't stand the look of a bullpup versus a traditional length rifle. They just don't like the short look of a bullpup. It's just not what they're used to. It's not what they've used all their lives. It just doesn't look right to them. They'd much rather go with a standard rifle based on the traditional look of it, especially from what I've experienced, is people who are interested in a wood-stocked rifle. You get more of the beauty of the wood in a standard length rifle. So I think for most people what it comes down to is just personal preference, but it does come down to how the gun looks. There certainly are advantages to having a shorter gun if you're hunting, doing a lot of stalking, a heavily wooded area. There's just less interference with the shorter gun. But for most people, as I said, it's just some people can't stand the look of a bullpup versus a traditional rifle. The same way, some people, if something came in a choice of a synthetic stock or a wooden stock, they would never choose the synthetic stock. The wooden stock just has a more traditional look to it. Doesn't matter the advantages of synthetic stock. Just can't see spending a lot of money on it, any money, hard-earned money, on something that just doesn't look right to a particular person. So that's going to lead me into my next video where I'm going to discuss some thinking, some decisions that I have made regarding my next airgun purchase. But until then, that will be a different video. Guys, shoot safe, stay safe, and take care.